It's time for Sharia Crime Stoppers again, and we appreciate those of you tuning in. You're not watching Jeopardy or Wheel of Fortune, you're with us, and we appreciate that. This is the ongoing webinar Tuesday series that we've been doing now for quite a while. We've got another excellent presentation tonight. I just want to issue a thank you from Mary and David and myself for your attendance and the fact that you are spreading the word, because the numbers are growing, and we appreciate that. It's what we need to do to prepare for next year. So we are Sharia Crime Stoppers, part of the United West. Mary Warbicki is our co-host. Good evening, Mary.
Good evening, Dick, and all of our attendees. Thanks for being here.
And our guest tonight is David Boris. David, welcome. David is co-founder of the United West, and frankly, the reason there is, co-founder of Sharia Crime Stoppers. United West, we'll give that credit to Tom Trento, and we'll be grateful for his support of our work. So David Boris, why don't you come on, and before you do, let me just mention that there would be no Sharia Crime Stoppers without David. It is his content, it is his dedication to the mission of explaining Sharia crime, its problems, its potential danger to America, and the need for law enforcement, prosecutors, average citizens to be trained. David Boris, good evening.
Good evening, Dick, and it's wonderful to be with all of you tonight, and hopefully you'll find some information here useful and challenging to you by the time we get through to it.
Why don't we bring up the title slide if we could, and tonight we're going to focus on how Islamists influence higher and secondary education in America. David has put this material together as part of his ongoing work. As you know, David has 1-, 2-, and 3-day seminars that are available for law enforcement, and as well as presentations for citizens briefings. This topic is very significant, and David, before we jump into it, why don't you give our audience a little bit of background into your career and your work with law enforcement in the military as well as in the civilian arena?
Okay, I spent 23 years in the Army, retiring in 1991, and from there I went to work here locally in Georgia, first with the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office, where I spent 16 years. And then the last 3 years of my civilian law enforcement career was spent with the Woodstock Police Department as Chief of Police. It was in 2012, actually, when I left that assignment to start hopefully training law enforcement full-time on a voluntary basis. So that's, in a nutshell, what I've done and what I continue to do with Sharia Crime Stoppers.
Okay, well, why don't we jump in? Before we do that, let me mention David has divided this into two parts. The first part will focus on higher education, our colleges and universities. We'll take a little break for your Q&A, and we'll continue with the secondary education part of the presentation, and again, have Q&A at the end of that. What that means is that you are welcome to push the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and enter written comments throughout the presentation. Mary will come on board at the first break to ask the questions that apply to the university level. David will continue, and then we'll do the secondary education Q&A at the very end. So with that, David, why don't you kick us off and get us going on the presentation?
Okay, Dick, I will. So these are the takeaways from tonight. And while you're watching that, I am going to take myself off camera so you can pay attention to what's on the screen. I want to do a little context, if you will, for this topic and talk about the Muslim Brotherhood's plan to impose Sharia law in America and how they are soliciting the help of other Muslims, not necessarily affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood, but nonetheless trying to absorb them into their cause of civilization jihad for conquest. And then we'll get into the higher education by first focusing on the Muslim Students Association, how they influence what is presented on our college campuses. Following that, we'll talk about the sources of funding that comes from many Muslim countries and how that impacts on our college campuses. And then we'll break and follow it up with the public schools and how those have been penetrated. So that's basically the lay of the land for tonight. So let's jump in and take a look at what the threat is that is confronting us. So first of all, we have to just by way of review, that there are two axes of advance or attacks that we face. One is certainly one that we're most concerned about or familiar with, the overt violence committed by lone independent terrorists here in the United States since 9/11. Actually, we could go back even further if we wanted to, but nonetheless, we usually start at 9/11, the direct attacks, all part of a network. Jihad is part of a global network. And then the second axis is a nonviolent program known as Civilization Jihad, or for some people, soft jihad. Soft jihad of the tongue and pen that's being sponsored by the Muslim Brotherhood in America. Now, it's important to recognize that both of these axes have the same ultimate goal to establish Sharia law over mankind, and they complement each other. You can think of them, one as the good cop and the other the bad cop, if you will. These are just some of the faces of what we are confronted with, the faces of the soft jihadists, all affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood. But don't be complacent. There are hundreds more just like them, all dedicated to the conquest. We know what the Muslim Brotherhood's plan is because they published it. They published it in this document, which is their official title, the Explanatory Memorandum on the General Strategic Goal for the group in North America. Let's not mince any words. This is what they're up to. The Brotherhood must understand that their work in America is a grand jihad to destroy Western civilization from within and sabotage its miserable house by their own hands in the hands of believers. Now remember, this memorandum was written to Muslim brothers. So when they say by their own hands, they're talking about non-Muslims are going to help them sabotage our miserable house, along with their efforts. And in case if that paragraph doesn't make sense to you, this might. So that America is eliminated and God's religion is made victorious. Then they go on to admonish themselves, without this level of understanding, we are not up to the challenge and not prepared for jihad. As indicated on the screen, the document was prepared by a senior Muslim Brotherhood executive, Muhammad Akram, in 1991. So we've known about this for some time. It's just as good as having the playbook of your opponent on Sunday afternoon for professional football. We've had it. Unfortunately, we're not paying attention to it. Also in this document lists 29 Muslim Brotherhood organizations in America, with the Islamic Society of North America right at the top of the list, followed by its parent organization and first Muslim Brotherhood front group established in America, the Muslim Students Association, which we'll talk about in a few moments. So the organizations of the Muslim Brotherhood in America form a network that has morphed over time into a sophisticated and complex structure to establish Islamic conquest. Through thousands of entities, many on our college campuses, backed by over 3,000 mosques and Islamic centers in our cities. Dozens of charities, they have Islamic schools, they have political candidates, and of course, the enablers or the useful idiots who are on board with what they're trying to do. All working in concert to change America by exploiting and hiding behind the First Amendment and political correctness through a gradual process called settlement. Settlement causes Islam to become integrated in America, firmly rooted, enabled, and entrenching within our society, done in stages. And a key part, again, according to them, of settlement process is the network of mosques and Islamic centers in our country that serve as the axis of their movement, their term. The second key provision of the settlement process is to increase Muslim populations through conversions, immigration, and births. The memorandum tells Muslims not to assimilate, but to force acceptance of their practices under Sharia throughout our nation's culture. Another way to express this settlement process is Muslims are told to remain segregated within their own enclaves, also known as rabats, which are at one time frontier outposts for jihad against infidels. In the words of President Erdogan of Turkey, accomplish jihad through the womb, which will bring them victory. As stated, the settlement process is done in stages, with stage 1, while the Muslims' population is low, keep a low profile and follow the peaceful verses revealed to Muhammad in Mecca between 610 and 622. Make few demands. Don't bring it any undue attention to yourself. Just show that you're a good neighbor. Phase 2, as the Muslim numbers increase, publicly practice Sharia compliance within established enclaves, the enclaves we just talked about, publicly condemn terrorism, and seek interfaith dialogue with Christians and Jews. Phase 3 is where many of you will see that we've entered. Phase 3 unfolds today with Muslim Brotherhood demands for special Muslim privileges and the use of civil suits to silence opposition. In Phase 4, which we are also in, added pressure of censorship and the imposition of Sharia practices throughout all U.S. institutions. Threaten civil unrest. And then finally, imposition. Control of the host nation, or our nation if you will, and Sharia is finally imposed. That's the final phase, and it can be done without firing a shot. Collectively, these phases comprise pre-jihad or pre-violence and rely heavily on the imposition of censorship, deception, and infiltration into our institutions. Now, to summarize the characteristics of the Muslim Brotherhood, much of its funding comes from Saudi Arabia, and as well as other Muslim countries. And since the Bush and Obama administrations, they have been given a green light into our government, media, and other institutions, while non-Muslim Brotherhood groups have been totally marginalized and ignored. Finally, to where the Muslim Brotherhood is the sole voice for Muslims in America. Rest assured, there is a considerable array of forces that are in lockstep to bring our country down as we know it. And more allies are being added with members of the progressive feminist movement, along with Antifa and Black Lives Matter groups joining in. Of all the groups, the social Marxists of the red axis have been trying to subvert us for the longest period of time. There is no better example than Antonio Gramsci and his writings contained in his prison notebooks. Gramsci died in an Italian prison in 1937, but not before he advanced the notion that successful revolutions take time and must happen from within the institutions, which was later conceptualized by Rudy Deutsch in 1967 with the name The Long Run March Through the Institutions. By then, the seeds of the Frankfurt School had long before been planted and were bearing much fruit throughout academia. With this background in mind, let's now turn to our topic of education and how this institution has been penetrated by the Muslim Brotherhood and its Marxist allies. The first Muslim Brotherhood front group to establish in America in 1963, with its members who were fleeing from Egypt, who left their guns behind, was the Muslim Student Association. It has a presence on hundreds of college campuses nationwide. Some of its more prominent alumni are Anwar al-Awlaki, former president of the Colorado State University MSA, who we know played a significant role in the Fort Hood attack and dozens of others globally. Tariq Mahana, an MSA official at the Massachusetts College of Pharmacy, was indicted for providing material support to terrorists. Then there's Abdul Rahman al-Amoudi. He was the MSA's national president, now serving 23 years on various terrorism charges. Afia Siddiqui from the Muslim Student Association at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology was convicted for plotting attacks against New York City landmarks and attempting to murder a U.S. Army captain. Ali Assad Shandia, president of Montgomery College Muslim Student Association, and convicted of being part of the Northern Virginia Jihad. And lastly, Walid Haj-Juladan was the president of the University of Arizona MSA and now listed as a special global terrorist. But MSA alumni are the least of our worries. Since the early 1970s, Saudi oil money has been used to influence how Islam is presented in our colleges and university. Remember, Wahhabism is the brand of Islam of Saudi Arabia and is just another name for orthodox or fundamentalist beliefs known as Salafism. With free money, there are always strings attached, and the Saudis get to approve what is taught, who teaches it, and the type of curriculum accepted. Over the past decades, thousands of students have been influenced by the Saudi brand and have gone on to work in all of our public and private institutions. This is part of the penetration. As you can see, the amounts of money funding to various universities are considerable. And one can only help but ask, why does Yale University need an Islamic Law Center? Why is it necessary to have a course of instruction on Sharia law rather than focusing on U.S. law? Could the answer be because the powers that be are promoting Sharia in our courtrooms? Since 2012, Qatar has given over $1.4 billion to higher education in the United States, followed by China giving over $680 million. Altogether, over $10 billion has been funneled from mostly Muslim countries to our colleges and universities. For more information, visit the Clarion Intelligence Network's online report, Foreign Influence Operations on U.S. Universities. The report gives the names of the universities, information about each country giving the money, and the Muslim Brotherhood Front Group that is the lead entity behind funding, engaging, and training academics. One of the 29 Muslim Brotherhood Front Groups identified in the Explanatory Memorandum is the International Institute of Islamic Thought, or IIIT, headquartered in Herndon, Virginia, near Washington, D.C., within the so-called Wahhabi corridor, along with other Muslim Brotherhood groups. So the Saudis control the Middle Eastern studies programs at hundreds of colleges and universities nationwide. They also influence what is taught about the ideology of jihad, which may be why one Muslim FBI employee in Detroit refers to jihad as her inner battle against cheesecake. The Saudi influence also favors Palestinian causes, while citing Israel for humanitarian abuses. And they make sure we never connect the dots between homegrown terrorists and Islam, while ensuring only those professors who are in lockstep with peaceful Islam get hired. As for strict speech codes, the Saudis have their MSA allies to serve as tripwires to make sure no one is allowed to speak out on college campuses and universities against the jihadists or the Muslim Brotherhood. While the MSA member Saadi Sufuddin at the University of California calls for the extermination of Jews and the destruction of Israel in one breath, she labels anything said critical of Sharia as hate speech. To be sure, many of our university presidents and governing boards have been compromised by taking millions of dollars in exchange for no criticism or factual information about Islam, jihadists, or the Muslim Brotherhood. And at the same time, these same universities promote Palestinian causes and Hamas through groups like Students for Justice in Palestine and American Muslims for Palestine, while simultaneously calling for the boycotts, divestments, and sanctions against Israel. As for the foreign money, it's not being reported as required by U.S. law. Well, the consequences of this, Walid Paris, author and occasional Fox News contributor, addresses the damage caused by misinformed students to our media and the other institutions. Let's now turn to the activist side of the Muslim Student Association and how its members and sympathizers are using the threat of violence to influence elections. Prior to the Trump's election in 2016, the MSA at University of Chicago partnered with MoveOn.org and CARE to mobilize minority students affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood and by using Craigslist to recruit demonstrators. Remember, the Council of American Islamic Relations was shown to be affiliated with Hamas at the Holy Land Foundation trial in 2008 and 2009. Even Al-Qaeda entered the movement and calls American blacks to jihad. Remember what happened at Berkeley? The torching there was all part of the plan. And let's not forget about how extensive our Antifa is. There is no national structure. They're all localized, and they have a history of violence and is allied with groups previously mentioned. Meanwhile, we can capitulate to the Muslim Brotherhood orders. Forced submission to Muslim demands is capitulation to establish special privileges only for Muslims. Remember, as their numbers increase, the Muslim Brotherhood will make more demands and more privileges. Some examples: 3 schools, the Denver Christian Academy, Mauritania Baptist University in Wisconsin, and the Clark University in Iowa, all use the word crusader in their logos. All agreed to submit to Muslim demands to remove the word because it's considered offensive. The question is, why is the word so offensive? Because Islamic fundamentalists and many academic progressives and liberals have revised historical truths about the Crusades by promoting the canard that Christian warriors waged aggression against Muslims by conquering their lands. The facts are the Crusades started in 1096, long after jihadists had conquered Christian and Jewish countries, following the death of Muhammad in 632. Returning to the topic at hand about special demands and privileges, there is no better example than demands for segregated swim periods for Muslim females at public pools, many at colleges and universities. Harvard, in North Carolina, San Diego, Maryland, Minnesota, George Washington University, Oregon, and segregated swimming for Muslim women creeps in Nashville and Virginia. And at my alma mater, a female Muslim applicant requested a change in the cadet uniform regulations to permit her to wear the headscarf, and the administration caved to her demands. At the University of Maryland, Muslim students demand separate prayer rooms in each major building and bus shuttles to local mosques for prayers. A demand for women's-only lunchroom for Muslims at Kansas University. And in California, a Catholic school submits to demands to remove religious statues, all part of the one-way street of coexistence to prevent lawsuits, adverse publicity, or civil unrest. To summarize, before pausing to handle any questions or comments about this portion of the presentation, all of what we've discussed in part is part of the Muslim Brotherhood's long-term strategy to establish Sharia law over America. It was revealed by the titular leader of the Muslim Brotherhood, Yusuf al-Qaradawi, in late 2011, to be accomplished under the banner of the Muslim Brotherhood in America, along with the front groups, all in lockstep with the explanatory memorandum to eliminate America. through penetration into all of our institutions to include our colleges and universities, through a process called settlement or DAWAH, now on steroids, forcing us to submit, through nonviolence, by employing a quiet insurgency, as envisioned by Antonio Gramsci from his Italian jail cell in 1937. So with that, we'll go take a look and see if anyone has any questions.
David, are you coming back on? There we go. All right, we've got a few questions already. Very good presentation, David. We've got Anonymous asking, isn't it true that the jihad could never succeed except that it is protected, enabled, and encouraged by the leftist, Marxist that also hate America in the government, media, and universities?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I'm going to show you at the end tonight who is directly responsible for that, called the Purge of training for federal law enforcement as well as the military. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. You're absolutely right, and that's why I tried to make the connection between not only the Muslim Brotherhood, but the Marxists and the red-green axis. They're all working together. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, and both of these groups are working diligently to subvert our Constitution and destroy America as you and I know it.
Well, he follows up, or he or she follows up and asks the question, do you think they've actually been fooled by the jihadists, or do you think they know that the jihadists are here to destroy America and they think they'll deal with them later, or do you think it's just the leftists hate all types of religion and anything related to America?
Well, that's a
loaded question.
Yeah. The social Marxists have denied the existence of God right from the beginning. We know that, and they've been against all religions. In terms of Islam, they do not like Christians and Jews. In fact, enmity and hate shall forever reign between us. So we face that aspect as well. So they're in lockstep. Their ideologies, both of their ideologies are in lockstep, and they're incompatible with each other to do away with us from inside. And remember, I said at the outset, the Muslim Brotherhood is using jihad of the tongue through their verbal comments as well as the pen from what they write. That is part of the soft jihad of the Muslim Brotherhood, and they're experts at doing it, and they've got us on the ropes right now. And hopefully with some of the ideas that I'll give you at the end, we can at least address what's going on our college campuses and secondary schools.
We've got a question in terms of the secondary schools. You can homeschool high school kids, or K through 12 anyways. You could do homeschooling, but if you find out the colleges and universities that your child is going to has Islamic infiltration, what are the options for the parents? What can they do other than move them out of that college?
Well, I was just going to say, then take them out of the college.
Yeah.
And write to the president and let the president understand exactly why you're doing it.
Yeah.
All of these colleges and universities have alumni associations. Write to them as well. But more importantly, do your research before you even apply to a college or university. Quite frankly, I'd stay away from all Ivy League schools unless I was going to be taking some of the hard courses in sciences, but not or medicine, but certainly not the soft liberal arts courses where this has primarily been infected by the Muslim Brotherhood and the progressives. So there are plenty of colleges and universities, neighborhood colleges and universities that you can send your child to, get a good education, and have some influence over what is being taught. But these large schools have all been compromised to such an extent, and you can see the money that's coming in. That's why they're compromised. Yeah. They're taking the money and turning their back on education.
Has there been any pushback anywhere in any of the colleges and universities for the events you described?
If there have been, I don't know of them.
Okay. And Claire is with us tonight, and she's asking for clarification. Let me read it. Important clarification. Since the HLF, Holy Land Foundation trial, the U.S. Muslim Brotherhood changed its MO drastically, especially more recently. Saudis are not funding U.S. Muslim Brotherhood as before. Most dollars from the Muslim Brotherhood fronts is raised entirely locally in the mosques and Islamic centers. If any outside funding still comes in through for the Muslim Brotherhood groups, it is now from Turkey, not KSA, although both KSA and Qatar do fund many universities and think tanks and lobbying groups. Thank you, Claire, for that clarification.
Well, the Clarion Intelligence Network just published an extensive study of all the money that has come from Muslim countries and some other non-Muslim countries since 2012. And that's what I was focusing on. $12 billion is a lot of money over a relatively short period of time. So if they've changed their strategy, fine, but the money's been here for a long time. This has been going on for decades. This is not a recent phenomenon.
And the best place to find that, somebody's asking about the amount of money donated to colleges, is through the Clarion Project. They have a article on it?
Yep.
Okay.
Clarion Network, and we'll post the name of that study on our website so you can get to it.
Okay. Linda's asking, what are the expectations if the Muslim Brotherhood is banned? Will laws be required to supplement the declaration? Is there an anticipation of violence? I guess she's talking about declaring them a foreign terrorist. Yeah.
I don't see any political will to do that.
Yeah.
I know that both the President and Secretary of State have talked about it, but evidently, keep in mind there's a lot of money going to public officials to their campaigns. Over 100 Democrats have already signed on letters of support for the Council of American Islamic Relations. That shows how deep the penetration has gotten in our political establishment.
And the Muslim Student Association, is that only on college campuses, college and universities? It's not in the secondary schools, correct?
That's a good question. I've never heard of Muslim student associations having any kind of organization in the secondary schools, but that doesn't mean they don't have some other way to get in there. But I have not heard of that yet.
Okay. All right, that's all we got for now. Let's go on to the next set of questions. I'm sorry, not the next set of questions, the next part to this. My apologies. Okay. Go ahead, David.
Well, there it is. Let me get off camera here. And we're going to talk about our secondary education and the penetration there. This is where the red-green axis is having its greatest impact. Our local schools, its teachers and children are all being targeted relentlessly by those who want to make sure the next generation will not stand in the way of the Muslim Brotherhood or social Marxists. Nowhere is this better displayed than this group, the Democratic Socialists of America and Young Democrats Socialists of America, which has recently published a pamphlet entitled, Why Socialists Should Become Teachers. Let's turn first to some examples of cultural diversity training for our students. Parents in Denver were asked to contact their local school board a couple of years back about a student field trip to a local mosque requiring non-Muslim female students to wear the head covering. While at a Massachusetts field trip to a mosque, female students were instructed how to pray by repeating the Muslim statement of faith, or Shahada. At Spring Grove, Pennsylvania Middle School, students were instructed how to properly wear the hijab, like students at Vernon Hill High School outside of Chicago and in Texas, while students at Pine Bush High School in New York were told to say the Pledge of Allegiance in Arabic and to recite one nation under Allah. Then there's the entire student body of St. Petersburg Catholic High School in Florida. forced to hear Ahmed Badir speak about Islamophobia while he openly supports Hezbollah and CARE, a front group for Hamas. And Muslim students at a high school outside of Dallas, Texas, are provided with a segregated prayer room on campus where male and female worshipers are kept separate as they are in most mosques. And what about homework? Union Grove High School in Wisconsin had a 10th grade history writing assignment called Pretend You're a Muslim, and write 3 paragraphs of what it's like to be a Muslim here in the United States today. And that was for the whole class, not just for Muslim students. And in Murray County, Tennessee, 7th grade students instructed to write Allah is the only God, while students in a Virginia calligraphy class copied the Shahada. Students at the Hennepin School District near Minneapolis sing Allahu Akbar during a Christmas concert, while 9th graders at Salem Junior High School in Utah were told to make a propaganda poster for ISIS. Now let that sink in. Our students are told to make a propaganda poster in support of ISIS in our schools, while others told to define the 5 pillars of Islam. Then there's teacher training, multicultural style. In 2015, 50 Pennsylvania school teachers participated in sensitivity training about Islam that included instruction how to pray, just like their obedient fellow teachers in the Lebanon School District in Pennsylvania. While teachers in Michigan line up behind their female students, all proudly wearing the head covering. Another example are the types of misinformation and propaganda being pushed by teachers to their students. Parents need to take action to pay close attention to what their children are being exposed to in the classroom. Speaking of teacher training, Huda Essa is the face behind Cultural Links LLC of Michigan, and is part of a well-orchestrated Islamic propaganda campaign aimed at teachers in Michigan, California, Georgia, Texas, and Florida, according to the Thomas More Law Center in Ann Arbor. Essa has written 2 books depicted here, aimed at young children. During her training session in Michigan's Novi Community Schools District, she presented falsehoods and inaccuracies about Islam to over 400 school teachers. She disparaged Christianity and bashed America, and not one teacher rose in protest. The 2-day seminar was mandatory and taxpayer funded. According to the information uncovered by the Thomas More Law Center, Essa stated, terrorism has nothing to do with Islam. White Christian men are more dangerous than Islamic radicals. The Quran is superior to the Bible, and that poor treatment of women in Islamic countries is because of cultural differences, not the religion of Islam. As stated by the president of the Thomas More Law Center and chief counsel, this type of infiltration amounts to an Islamic Trojan horse within our public school systems. No other religion gets this kind of special treatment in our schools. And finally, pressure mounts to recognize key Muslim holidays for all students, not just Muslim students. In Maryland, New York, and Philadelphia, all have caved to Muslim demands. As for school textbooks, information is one-sided to say the least, as uncovered by numerous studies showing that an incomplete or misleading view of Islam is presented. Just one of many alternative lifestyles available to students. All equal, none more harmful than any other. That deserves full protection under the First Amendment, but no mention of Sharia crimes. That would be viewed as racist, intolerant, or Islamophobic. Facts about Islam's violent history are conveniently overlooked, and terrorists are on the fringe considered rotten apples, in no way connected to the peaceful theology of Sharia. While there is never a mention about female genital mutilation, wife beatings, pedophilia, and rape, all of which are sanctioned by Sharia. So multiculturalism dominates. It's the major driving force in current society, All cultures are equal. All differences are to be celebrated and promoted. To criticize is judgmental, racist, and Islamophobic. And American exceptionalism is mocked and denigrated. Traditional Judeo-Christian values are denigrated. They are the root cause of all social ills, and the source of conflicts began when European Christians introduced their notions of right and wrong, moral absolutes, and good and evil. Freedom of speech only applies to followers of multiculturalism. Contrary opinions are rejected and suppressed. Other freedoms are taken for granted. Many of you are probably wondering how our school textbooks ended up this way. It has a lot to do with this group in California, the Institute on Religion and Civic Values, formerly known as the Council of Islamic Education. This fundamentalist Muslim Brotherhood affiliated organization was founded by Shabir Mansouri in 1990 and is considered the gatekeeper of everything Islamic in school history, religion, and education textbooks. This group also provides teaching guides directly to teachers, often bypassing school boards, as well as in-service training like we just viewed for teachers. Mansouri uses intimidation to force book publishers to submit their books for review, or they face charges of racism and xenophobia. So the battle is on. This is why the work of Roy White and his band of trained and committed volunteer textbook watchdogs is so terribly important. Truth in Texas Textbooks is just one of several local groups who are now engaged in the battle for truth and accurate information within the classroom. Many of the most popular textbooks have been compromised. And as for Common Core, it's receiving funding and support from Qatar. Well, it also gives generously to the Austin, Texas Independent School District for Arabic language and cultural instruction. Qatar also supports terrorism organizations involved in Jihad, like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, and the Taliban narcotics and slave trade. Scouting programs also have been targeted for Islamic indoctrination. For example, at the Great Revelations Academy in Dearborn, the private Islamic school openly supports Iran's supreme leader and the leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, according to the Clarion Intelligence Network, just like Scouts do in Lebanon. Back in Michigan, a branch in Detroit area is called the Al-Mustafa Scouts. The leadership of this branch includes supporters of the Iranian regime, as well as leaders who promote America as the biggest terrorists in the world. And in case you're concerned about what schools are feeding our children at noontime, as an example, Dearborn is limiting meat choices to only those sanctioned by Sharia procedures. Yet another indication how our culture is being transformed to Islamic demands. And to make matters worse, just today, the Thomas More Law Center reported that the U.S. Supreme Court refused to consider a case of an 11th grade student in Maryland who refused to write the Shahada even after being threatened with a failing grade. As for Muslim school-age children, they are being taught to hate, as was recently revealed at the Islamic Center of Philadelphia. Here, children promote martyrdom to oppose their enemies and the use of decapitations, with martyrdom again emphasized. So where do such ideas of killing, martyrdom, and decapitations come from? Well, from Allah himself and his words found in the Quran. Just some of the 109 verses in the Quran that require Muslims to kill non-Muslims and to strike terror into their hearts, and to strike off their heads and amputate their fingers and feet. Commands such as these were revealed to Muhammad following his arrival in Medina in 6th 22, and remain general orders to be followed until Sharia law rules mankind. The worldview of fundamentalists who are promoting Sharia law is real easy and simple to grasp. All land that not governed by Islamic law is considered the house of war and is in a state of rebellion, where non-believers are given three choices. This is the basis for which the Muslim school children are being taught, all being reinforced by Muslim clerics in mosques all across the country. Under the banner of loyalty and enmity, which has motivated jihadists in America since 9/11. Before closing our topic for this evening and turning our webinar back over to Mary for questions and comments, one final bit of information to remember. Our nation is not being protected from the activities of the Muslim Brotherhood and their network in America, thanks to these four individuals in the Obama administration: Dwight Holden of the Department of Justice, John Brennan before heading the CIA and serving as Barack Obama's National Advisor for Security on Terrorism, General Martin Dempsey, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and Robert Mueller, Director of the FBI, all agreed to Muslim Brotherhood demands to purge all Islamic threat training provided to federal national security and law enforcement officers back in 2011 and 2012. So all of our federal authorities that are supposed to be protecting us are not receiving the training that they need to properly protect us and to deal with this threat. And nothing has changed to this very day. Sun Tzu talked about, in his Art of War, how the enemy can impose his will on us while making us impotent to resist. So let me close by some action steps. There are probably many others, but first, stay informed. The United West and other websites are available. Take advantage of them. Sponsor national security events in your area so other people are aware of what's going on. Monitor your children's homework, and if able, consider homeschooling. Support publicly those speaking out when they're attacked. Monitor your secondary schools and elected board members. And lastly, participate in textbook review programs. So at this point, I'm going to turn the proceeding back over to Mary and to your questions.
All right, David, we have quite a few questions. I wanted to actually ask you a few and reference a piece that you included in yours in terms of this Thomas More Law Center recent news today that the U.S. Supreme Court declined to resolve public schools' double standard in promoting Islam while disparaging Christianity. That one, number one, it should never have had to go to the Supreme Court. This is where I think the school boards are so important in this, and they're not doing their job. Would you comment a little more on that?
Well, I can't comment why the Supreme Court turned it down, if in fact that's in writing. I just came across this bit of information late this afternoon, so that's something that we can look for. Hopefully it'll be revealed by the Thomas More Law Center. I do know that they provided America's brief in support of the Supreme Court to take a look at this, but why they declined and on what grounds, I'm not, I have no information.
But it just surprises me it had to go that far, I guess. And they're saying that it was under the pretext of teaching history or social studies. Public schools across America are promoting the religion of Islam in so many ways, and this student stood up for her rights to not have to say the Shahada or write it. Now, what was interesting in the article that David referenced was that this student talks about a PowerPoint presentation that was given, and here's some points that were in that PowerPoint presentation, stating that she was objecting to is that it says most Muslims' faith is stronger than the average Christian. Islam at heart is a peaceful religion. Jihad is a personal struggle and devotion to Islam, especially involving spiritual discipline. To Muslims, Allah is the same God that is worshipped in Christianity and Judaism. This is a good one. Men are the managers of the affairs of women, and righteous women are therefore obedient. How is that related to, what did he say, history and social studies? I guess it's social studies for women to be obedient. It was something else. Anyways.
I guess by that decision of non-decision, we now have a green light for Christians and Jews to promote our religions in schools just as fervently as the Islamists are doing. We'll see what the Supreme Court does about that.
Good point. Good point. Where do you see most of the indoctrination happening? Is it greater in the K through 12 or the colleges and universities?
I don't know how you could quantify it. It is a full court press in both areas, and they've been at it since 1963. Remember, it was no mistake that the first group here was the Muslim Students Association that came from Egypt, and it went to and it embedded itself in a university in Illinois, at Champaign, Illinois, and they've been at it ever since. And so, both in our higher education as well as secondary schools, they're firmly embedded. And don't forget, they have allies. They have the allies of the Red Axis, who are working just as hard as they are to penetrate. This is the progressive socialist agenda that we see so many of our Democratic presidential candidates doing backflips over. This is why this election that's coming up is so terribly important, because if we lose, then all of this will come to pass. There will be no turning back.
Excellent point. Well, we've got a little bit of clarification came to us from the last question asking about, is the MSA only in the colleges and universities? Claire tells us that they're all the way down to the middle schools, MSA. And Brenda tells us that there's actually one in West Virginia at George Washington High School. There's an MSA group there as well. So it's down to the middle schools, which is frightening in terms of the children and how the indoctrination works with that. So thank you both for that clarification. And let's see, we've got a few more here. Let me get through them. They have made such huge advancements, and the pushback is so small. Can we really have success in fighting this takeover when those in power are so complicit?
It's going to happen in one school district at a time. It's going to happen on one college campus at a time. So pick your fights locally. It's not going to happen all at once. This is going on for decades, and it's going to get decades to turn this around. But you can fight on a local level. You have to be very diligent in working at your schools, your local public schools, as well as the colleges and universities that you're sending your children to and your grandchildren to. It's a question of awareness and becoming involved in and holding our officials accountable.
Okay, Cindy's asking, has the UK and Europe already gone through all this in their public schools? Is this happening in the Canadian school system too?
As best as I know it is. This is a full course press throughout Western civilization. Canada is so far compromised, in some respects worse than we are, because they're actually limiting, as a matter of policy, freedom of speech to speak out. There is no Fox News or any conservative news outlet that I'm aware of up in Canada. So they're getting a heavy dose of progressivism, social Marxism, what have you, and the same in Europe.
Do we know if the largest textbook publisher, and she mentions Houghton Mifflin with question marks, I'm not sure I've heard of that, but was purchased by by an Islamic organization? She seemed to have heard that from another organization. Do you know?
I can't comment on that.
Okay. Sorry, we don't know the answer to that. What is taking place is clearly sedition. If you and many others know what is going on, how come our government cannot step in and stop Muslims from coming in and shutting come in and shut down mosques. This is not a religion, it is a culture. Okay, well, we know that. This is sedition. What are your thoughts and comments on that?
Well, there's no question about it. If you look at the definition of the legal standards that are required, if we had the political will to go after, we could shut it down. But we don't. Trump is up against tremendous support or opposition in this area, as are several other conservatives who have tried. There is a whole network of individuals who are committed to making sure that this whole plan succeeds. What we have to realize now is now it's out in the open. Now it's out in the open. This is all part of the swamp. This is all part of how deep the swamp is. And now we're getting a chance to look at it, smell it, take a look at it for what it is, and we have to figure out how we're going to attack it.
Do you know how many student publishers are owned or partially owned by the Muslim Brotherhood or by an organization, Islamic organization?
Are you talking about the major publishers of school textbooks?
Yes.
No, I do not.
Okay.
I don't know if any are. They've just been compromised. They're scared to death of being called out as being Islamophobic, xenophobic, racist, or whatever name that they can throw at you. They don't want the adverse publicity. They don't want to lose the revenue from secondary schools and colleges who buy this trash. So they capitulate. And don't forget, they're getting all this money. All this money that has come since 2012 from overseas, that to this day is not even being reported properly as required by federal law.
Okay, we've got Sue asking, when people clamor to bring religion back into our public schools, does it facilitate this kind of Islamization in our schools?
What's facilitating it is people not standing up to prevent it. That's what's facilitating it. And unfortunately, we've got a Supreme Court, for whatever reason, it doesn't want to take this up, and I hope it's not because they don't want to be controversial, and they've bowed to political correctness. So I don't know what the vote was, how many voted against it, if in fact a vote was even published.
Most all the rest is commentary, so I think that's all of the questions for tonight.
Well, again, I want to thank everyone for joining us, and at this point I'm going to sign off and let Dick take over from there. So thank you everybody for being with us, and hopefully it's proved to be enlightening.
Thank you, David.
Thank you very, very much, David. We're going to continue. Just a second here. The content here is really disturbing for anybody. We love our children, we love our grandchildren, we seem to have lost track of what the heck's going on. And it's terribly disturbing. I think the detail that David Morris puts in his presentations are so convincing, so beautifully presented with lots and lots of detail, just like he was presenting in a courtroom as an expert witness. So this is important things to take to heart. Mary, we're going to go on and review some action items and talk about what's coming up. So I'm going to invite you to convince yourself, think it through and convince yourself. This is a comprehensive set of indoctrination. It is part of the red-green axis. It is an act of war. I mean, clearly these people intend to erase America, and this is one way to do it. We heard from Alex Newman last month that any way that you commit to homeschooling for the K through 12 years, it's extremely important to consider it, even if you have to lower your standard of living and make economic changes in order to support not putting this poison into your children's head. If you happen to be paying tuition or you're a grandparent and you have college-age family members, I'm sorry, but it might disturb your Thanksgiving and Christmas activities. It's important to challenge these people, to just basically ask them what they're learning, talk with them, engage in it. It may be the conversations that we've all tried to put off. Maybe this is this holiday season. We're going to have them because next year's election is so overwhelming. It's so important to put into your college-age family member that maybe they have not been critically thinking, maybe they have been indoctrinated, and maybe they at a minimum need to begin to look at the other side and open their mind and not vote until they've done that. For them to vote simply as an indoctrinated product of our school system is damaging to America. So that would be an action item. This is not going to get any better. It will get incrementally much worse if the president is not Donald Trump in 2021 again. Much of what we're doing in this fall season is preparing and motivating and mobilizing people like you to take actions to make sure that we don't have a disaster next November. President Trump is the only answer to give us more time to solve these problems and basically keep America from evaporating. You can do that by becoming part of the one team. You're on tonight, so you are part of the one team. Spread the word, get other people to deal with it. We call it 2020 election. We're actually calling it a 2020 fight because ideally it will be a constitutional election. It doesn't have to be. The reality is when you see the activities that happen in Minnesota after the president speaks, etc., it'll be a fight in 2020. Let's hope it's an election and a constitutional one. We're doing it for the children. In terms of our preparation for next year, we continue with our Tuesday webinars. We do have next week a very important day for our Canadian friends and allies. On the 21st, there's an election. Is Justin Trudeau going to be reelected or not? And depending on how that goes, what are the messages coming out of Canada? So the day after the election, that would be a week from tonight, the 22nd, we have privilege to have a Canadian, Christine Douglas Williams, with us to give us her perspective on Justin Trudeau, the Canadian future, and the message for America. Very important lessons we can learn. Some really good news, the October 29th, 2 weeks from tonight, we're going to continue this conversation about the Islamic saturation within the U.S. government. Again, just like tonight, when David is able to give detail after detail, that's Filippini. Filippini is the detail on the saturation of the sponge that he talks about and the Islamic saturation in the U.S. government. We're going to talk about the Muslim Brotherhood, but we'll also touch on Iran and other elements. Moving along, we're preparing you to think through 2020 again. Stephen Baldwin will be with us on November 5th, Tuesday. He is projecting a soft civil war if Trump is not elected. What you're going to want to listen to in this presentation is examples of what would happen. What could one of these Democrat presidents with a House and Senate in their back pocket, what could they actually do? And Steve Baldwin's done some interesting things, including changing the number of Supreme Court justices and what that might imply. 1 week later, on the 12th, we're going to have Dr. Andrew Boston. Islamic Jew hatred in America it's certainly part of the MSA we talked about tonight, but it's across the board. Jew hatred emanating from Islam is what we're going to talk about there. An awful lot of Jews in America have their heads turned and are worried about the European anti-Semitism, which is terrible, but we're really going to dig down into Islamic Jew hatred and what it really means for our fellow citizens and for some of us personally. And then David Boris will be back again to end the fall 2019 season for Sharia Crime Stoppers. David will be coming back to talk specifically about Muslim deceivers. You know, those people that you see in the fancy hijabs talking about the leftist agenda without having anything to say about the dangers of Islam. These are deceivers, and David is going to have chapter and verse just like he did tonight. So we're going to be completing a really encouraging fall season. We appreciate your support. We are doubling our people that are interested in terms of registration. So thank you for that, spreading the word. So we really have a lot to be grateful for with your participation. So it sounds like we're almost done, but wait, there's more. There's a little extra special thing that's coming in November. It will be an extra special edition, and we will not be able to do much tonight but tease you. But next week we will have the details. We are going to have a couple of extra things happening in November, and we're very, very happy about that. We're working on that. More details next week. We are Sharia Crime Stoppers. We're the United West. We believe, and I think by now you believe, this is World War III. We wake up and we are at war. Unfortunately, our neighbors don't know about it and don't want to know about it. We are one team. You're part of it. We're preparing for the fight. And we have another reason. This is to save our children from the tyranny that we just heard about tonight. Injected into their heads is an acceptance of tyranny without them understanding it. And what a cruel thing to do. I just want to say one thing. When I grew up, teachers were special. How come there's not a teacher in America standing up against the teachers union? Where is a single teacher in your school objecting to the curriculum we're talking about? I can't believe there's not a single teacher who's willing to stand up and tell the truth or use their own conscience to talk about the red-green axis and what it's doing to their profession and to the words that come out of their mouths. We heard a lot about indoctrination. The opposite of indoctrination is critical thinking, and that's what we want to inject into the election next year. We want critical thinking by students, by adults, and by voters. And that's what Make America Think Again is, the logo of the United West. That's why we're here. So please keep in mind the United West as you move into your end of year giving. Think about an investment in the United West to keep us going next year. Mary, thank you so much for guiding us through the evening and working with David. We're very fortunate to have David as our leader.
Absolutely. And thank you to everybody tonight for your questions and comments. We tried to get them all in. I appreciate everybody's attendance tonight.
So next week, we're going to have to learn about what happens in Canada on the 21st. So please join us again. Thank you.
Thank you and good night.